Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriet Cole. It is Fashion Week already, right after Labor Day. Things get moving in New York City and everybody comes out. And I just got back from the beach and had the wonderful experience of going to an event uptown at Melba's that's part of this swirling moment of fashion and beauty and lifestyle. It was an event hosted by the Fragrance Foundation. And at this event was a man that you probably would recognize. You may not know his name, but you recognize him because he's been a model for more than 20 years, working with Ralph Lauren as one of the iconic faces for that brand. He has a line of fragrances that he launched a few years ago and just launched more and came uptown to talk about it. And I asked him to come and be on Dreamleapers. So please join me right now in welcoming Chris Collins. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Harriet.
Well, I'm so glad that everything worked out. I got home and walked around the corner, and there you were at this fabulous event. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, I want to, because Dreamleapers is all about people making their dreams come true. I want to go back for a minute because people, I know they know your face
Right.
because for so many years, you were often the only Black man representing Ralph Lauren. Prior
Hmm.
to you, a very dear friend of mine, may have been the first, Rashid Silvera, who was Ralph Lauren's Black guy representing the people
Hmm.
many years ago. But you have been in this role for a long time. And, one of the things I love about Ralph is that he created a world that, Ralph Lauren's vision of what the world could be like and kind of curated who represents that world. So I want you to talk about how you ended up being part of Ralph Lauren's world of image and desire and what life can be like.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Of course.
Um, I love to tell my story, and I love talking about like the genesis on how everything kind of how the journey started for me to get here in fragrance, and that journey did start with me working with Ralph Lauren. My first photo shoot was straight out of college in 1996 with Ralph. Um, Modeling wasn't anything that I'd ever thought, it wasn't in the plan. It wasn't something that I had, aspired to do. I was actually in college studying to be a doctor. But, I said, I want to take some time off. I want to see the world, travel a little bit. And then I ended up meeting an agent who introduced me to Ralph. He thought I'd be great for Ralph. And I ended up shooting with him for about 25 years.
That's amazing.
And the years that I was working with Ralph were transformative because I learned so much about marketing and branding
Yes.
from a marketing and branding genius.
Yep.
Um, and the one thing, well, the one of many things that I loved about working with Ralph was that he was very inclusive.
Hmm.
He had all skin types, skin colors, shape sizes, all people of the world, and his genius, in my opinion, was to tell you a story or give you an idea of this life that you can be part of. And if you buy into this brand, you are automatically in this fraternity of luxury, of opulence, and whatever else he wanted to market to you. So a lot of people thought that he was, basically selling you a shirt with a, a polo player on the shirt, which was his bestseller. I mean, he had so many incredible, fashion pieces, but his bestseller was a polo shirt with a polo player right on the chest. Iconic piece,
Yep.
that he created. But he didn't really sell you a shirt. He sold you an idea of this life, and by wearing the shirt, you'll be part of it. So that's the genius of his marketing. And it was basically luxury 101 for me that I learned from him, both directly and indirectly, which helped me launch my brand.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think of uh, in terms of marketing and just, and I think a lot of people will remember this. If you look at the window displays at Ralph Lauren stores anywhere in the world, anywhere in the United States, they are the same. And
Mm,
the intention behind them is so specific. You know, if there is a planter and there's a little bit of earth, you know,
mm-hmm.
that's on the side of the planter, it'll be in that same way at the store down the street or across the country. The
Mm,
intention of
right.
showing detail, and
Yeah.
this is what life can be like, and even the things that, you know, a little bit of spilled earth is still intentional.
Right.
It, to me, that is so brilliant because, you know, it used to be, and this is in the way back with
Mm-hmm.
designers, you know, you'd have, if you had a store at all, you had one store, and then people would interpret whatever your style was based upon, you know, how they would
Mm-hmm.
take it. Ralph gave you the whole world. Even in store, the setup would be the same. So in somebody else's store, you know,
Right.
whether it's in Macy's or Bloomingdale's or Berg, anywhere, that
Mm-hmm.
that that marketing focus would be the same. So I can imagine for you learning that, being part of that was definitely an education.
I got to tell you, when I first joined the Ralph Lauren team, I had no idea what I was in for, but it was an incredible eye-opening 2 decade plus experience because
Right.
you're absolutely right. So his his ideas were always his concepts are always very intentional, and he paid attention to detail, and it was always based around storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So every brand should take, a page from that book, including me, because storytelling is the most important, and your attention to detail, everything from the cap, the packaging, the way it feels in your hands, all those things. And his windows were almost the most important to him,
That's right.
especially at Bloomingdale's on 59th Street, because that was the first store that gave him a chance when he walked in with his ties.
I didn't
Um,
realize that.
so he was always very, very loyal to the first store that gave him a chance. As am I. Bergdorf Goodman was the first store that gave me a chance. So I am
Wow.
so loyal to them. All my partners are very important to me, but you always remember the store that gave you the first chance.
That's right.
Um,
And,
yeah.
and so for you, having been immersed in this world of luxury and also having roots in Harlem, because I know when I look at your line, which now you told me there are 12 fragrances in your line,
Hmm.
uh, Harlem is the anchor. Harlem is where your roots are, and there's so much legacy and history in Harlem. You know, you think about Ralph Lauren's world. The world of Harlem is even more iconic than Ralph Lauren. I mean, Harlem goes, the roots of Harlem run through the globe.
Right.
And you take a look at the Harlem Renaissance, which was a pulse point for so many in the creative arts and beyond. Uh, Tell me what Harlem means to you and why it became the focus, at least for launching your business.
To me, Harlem is like the epicenter of culture. Um, when you look back on like the Harlem Renaissance of the 20s, where there was like this explosion of art and music and fashion. I mean, there was no better time, um, to be, black in America when you were in Harlem. Um, and then throughout the years, there were ups and downs, and the war and poverty, and then more renaissances, because I think renaissances happen even if we don't really realize that, because there are constant rebirths in places and in people, in all of us.
Yeah.
And for me, um, when I decided that I was going to launch my brand, I thought it needed to be told, the story of Harlem through fragrance. So I always saw many people, tell their story through, documentary, through music, through art, but no one has ever told it through fragrance. And I said to myself, this is an opportunity. Harlem is where I've been for the last 18 years. Um, the idea was born for the fragrance brand in this brownstone where I've been for 18 years. So it was important for me to tell a story for my first collection. So my first three fragrances, the trilogy is called the Renaissance Collection, which is a tribute to the Harlem Renaissance. People always ask me, what's your favorite scent, and I always tell them it's my next one because I'm always working on the next fragrance.
That's right.
But what I will tell them, my most important scents are the three that I launched in the Renaissance Collection because that was what introduced me into the fragrance world. And what many people may not know is that, perfume is very French. Most
Yeah,
of the perfumers are in France. The fragrance houses are in the south of France in Grasse, where I've been. I spent a lot of time in both Paris and Grasse. And there's a really big cultural connection between France and Harlem, in particular Paris, because that's where the Josephine Bakers and Langston Hugheses, that's where they all went when, they weren't accepted here in their own country and the Parisians accepted them. So when I told the story about Harlem, they loved it. I
mm,
went over there, I did some appearances, the press loved it. Because even in Harlem, there's, a big Parisian, there's a lot of French restaurants
that's
in
true.
Harlem. I mean, in Paris, there's a lot of, art surrounded with Harlem story, music. So I knew that my connection to a world that was very French was important as well for me to tell that story of Harlem because that basically it made sense right away. It's like, oh,
Mm.
this makes complete sense, and now we understand where he's coming from. And I just thought it was important to tell that story first before I went on to tell other stories through my fragrances.
Yeah, look, I was just in Paris. My daughter just graduated from high school, and her graduation present was a trip to Paris. So we went this summer, and I used to go to Paris all the time for the
Mm-hmm.
fashion collections um, when I was running fashion at Essence and other places.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we went to a number of places where Black Americans had been. We were able to learn a bit more about James Baldwin and Richard Wright, and as you mentioned, Josephine Baker. And when you talk about this, it's so interesting, Chris, because one thing that has always been true in Paris is that Black Americans have been welcome, even when Black Americans weren't welcome here, in the United States. That there
Mm-hmm.
was a love for Black Americans early on, and there continues to be a love even today. And that counts for a lot for you to feel that you go somewhere and you're going to be welcome for who you are, right? And that doesn't mean that there aren't politics and other things that people could take issue with, but there's something very special about that relationship that you're talking about. And then beyond that, there's just France is the pulse point of fragrance. So yeah, so what made you choose? You said that you wanted to tell the story starting with Harlem through fragrance, but to just have a fragrance line at all, this is not something that most people do, and certainly not something that we think of as a Black man doing, to start a fragrance line. What made you choose to do that?
So, you know, when I was a kid, my my father, he was very into his style and his grooming and his fragrance. So he always wore like the classics of the 70s, like the English leathers and the gray flannels and the fragrances like that. And that was the genesis of me falling in love with fragrance. My dad smells so good, and that rubbed off on me because as I got older, when I started making enough money to buy my first fragrance, actually, my first job, my first purchase was fragrance,
Wow.
because I couldn't wait to have my
Be with
own
your
scent.
daddy.
And yes, because you know how we are with our parents, especially boys with the dad. I wanted to smell good. To me, it was more important to smell good than to actually dress well. So it was something that was always in front of me, and I just didn't realize that my obsession with fragrance would end up being something that later on in life that I would end up turning into a business. I was a smart kid, so I thought you had to be a doctor or lawyer if you were smart. But
Right.
I don't believe that. You can be creative, you can be an artist, you can be a musician. Um, and going back to everything in succession in my life, going back to the Ralph Lauren days, it taught me about the branding and product and experience and all those things. So I took what I learned. I met a perfumer who ended up being an incredible mentor and decided to do something that's never been done.
I love
And
it. Let me just pause and let folks know where they are, and then we'll jump back into the story. Everybody, you're listening to Dreamleapers with Harriet Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. It is Fashion Week, and I had the delightful pleasure of meeting a perfumer who resides in Harlem, a beautiful black man. I get to say beautiful because he's been a model for more than 25 years. You would know his face, even if you may not know his name. He has represented Ralph Lauren all over the world on countless photo shoots, being a face of that world that Ralph Lauren created. He is Chris Collins, and he just has introduced more fragrances in his Chris Collins line that he launched in Bergdorf Goodman. I think that's pretty great,
mm,
Chris. But you were just telling me, I want to go back to the story of your daddy for a minute,
yeah,
because first of all, just giving you and your father props. A lot of people don't have relationships with their fathers. A lot of black men do not have that. A lot of people don't have that.
mm,
I had a long, my whole life until he passed away, relationship with my dad, and he wore Old Spice. That
I
was
love
it.
Old Spice.
I mean,
I
Old Spice
love Old
is
Spice.
like the classic fragrance, right?
Hmm.
But he had his little splash of Old Spice he would put on, and my mother always had, she had her little tray of perfumes on her
Hmm.
vanity. They were very old school, but I love that idea that you had a really kind of being like your dad, that the fragrance was really important to him, that he created his own world and universe, and then you in turn have created that for people, not just for yourself but for others. But you mentioned that you created a great relationship with a perfumer. So
Yeah,
let's talk about the business and how that even works, because you could have a dream. This is the thing
right,
about dream leapers. You have a dream, but what do you do with it?
right.
Dreams often don't, nothing happens unless you start by taking action, building relationships, doing whatever it takes to get to the next level, and you indeed did that. So how did you meet this perfumer, and how did that relationship grow?
Well, it's funny because I would, a friend of mine wore a fragrance. Fragrance is very personal, right?
Hmm.
You have a very personal relationship with fragrance. And a friend of mine wore this one fragrance, um, and he was wearing it. I was like, wow, that smells really good. What is that? He said, well, you can have it because my girlfriend doesn't like it on me. And I said, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So then I wore it. And then it's funny because, some months down the line, we all hung out together and I was around his girlfriend and she said, Chris, you smell so good. What is that? So, that's why I'm saying a fragrance is very personal and your body chemistry can actually
That's right.
handle or deal with a fragrance differently than someone else. So I ran out of this fragrance. I don't believe in coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason. I think the universe kind of plans for you to be in certain places at certain times. Um, so I had to replenish my fragrance, and he told me that he bought it at Bergdorf Goodman, which again, it's a foreshadowing of something to come. So I go into the store and I say, "Do you have this bottle?" And I meet this guy who we're still friends. I'm still friends with today. And he told me, "Well, we don't have that, but we do have something else that I want you to try." So he said, "Try this fragrance." I tried it. It was a fragrance called Straight to Heaven by a perfumer named Killian. And then I wore the fragrance, fell in love with it. And at this point, this was the beginning of the category of niche fragrance. Before, it was more like mass. It was like the Calvin Kleins and the Ralph Laurens. But now you had these like niche artisanal perfumers coming out with these fragrances that were different, that smelled like rum, that smelled like, vodka or like super woody fragrances. So niche in a niche world, we use combinations of notes that aren't particularly normal
Mm-hmm.
because we have to be different. We have to stand out, and customers love that. So anyway, I end up wearing the fragrance, and I'm out somewhere, and this young lady comes up to me and tells me how good I smell. And I tell her what I'm wearing, and she says, "Oh my gosh, I work with Killian. I know him." I said,
Wow.
"Well, I would love to meet him. I would love to be introduced to him." Long story short, we ended up meeting. We did a project together. We went on CNBC and we talked about fragrance because he knew that my passion for fragrance is really strong. And then I said, this is my world. Whatever happened to me at 7 years old when I smelled Greg Flannel on my dad, which got me to this point, there's a reason why I'm here, and this is my world, and this is something that I can't stop thinking about. I can't eat because I'm thinking about it. I can't sleep because I'm thinking about it. So that's why I jumped off a limb, and I decided to launch my own fragrance, which as a black man, which where there weren't any,
Right.
I knew it was going to be tough, and he knew it was going to be tough.
Mm.
But he told me, tell a great story, make a great fragrance, have a plan, um, and let the chips fall where they may.
Mhm. And so, in starting your business, well, you just said so many things. I want to go back. I recently interviewed Tyler Perry,
Yeah.
and one of the things that he said, you just articulated. If you are eating, sleeping, dreaming about whatever that passion is that's burning in your soul, that's when you have to do it. You
Yeah.
can't just say, oh, this is a dream, but I have to do my 9 to 5, whatever that might be.
Right.
If it's burning in you, you have to do the work and make it manifest. And that is what you just described. And I think for everybody listening, the goal here of Dreamleapers, Chris, is you're telling your story, but I want it to inspire people to do their own thing, to pursue their dream, because so often we'll listen to a story and, oh, that sounds nice, but what do you
Hmm.
do with it, right? And you just described, you had to do it. And so
Hmm.
you had to figure it out. The next thing that often happens is people say, well, I can't afford to do it. And, finding the resources can be a challenge.
Hmm.
Tell us, was it savings from your modeling career? Like, what did you use to launch? Because this is an
Hmm.
expensive industry to enter.
Hmm.
How did
Right.
you, uh, finance this
Hmm.
dream?
Well, so I want to go back to something you said
Sure.
about what Tyler Perry said, which was very important because I think in life, right, there are things that we as humans are good at, right? And we can probably do them in our sleep. Like we have skills that if tasked to do something, we can do it. For me, that was modeling. I was good at it.
Right.
I made a ton of money. I traveled the world, but it wasn't what drove me.
Mm.
So there's what you're good at versus what is burning in your soul that you're so passionate about that you have to try. You have to go for it. And I'd say to people, when you think of, so if there was someone, if there was a young brother or sister that was intrigued about being in the world of perfume, and then they saw my brand sitting on a shelf in Saks Fifth Avenue and beautiful, put together brand, that should inspire you, but don't let that intimidate you
Right.
because if I showed you the beginning, you would probably say, wow, you know, because it was very humbling. Don't
Right.
think about how much money it's going to cost to build the brand. Think about first writing the story of uh, what you want the brand to feel like, or whatever it is that you want to do. If it's not a brand, just I always encourage people to write it down because our thoughts are very fleeting. Like
Right.
you can have 10 different ideas in your head, and by the time you wake up in a week, you forgot what you thought about last week.
That's true.
I think you should, if there's something that you're super passionate about, write it down, make it tangible so you can see it and hold yourself accountable to it. And start with one. Don't think about 12 fragrances.
Right.
Start with one scent that's in a jar that doesn't have fancy packaging that you take around to your friends to smell, which costs very little to actually do. So you have to start. You have to start. You can't think you need this of what I have in the beginning because it doesn't work that way. Trust me, just from experience. And if you look at most people who do have successful brands like Ralph Lauren, it didn't start the way it ended. He started making ties. He carried his ties to every store in New York. Ralph Lipschitz from the Bronx
That's
carried ties to every store. It didn't cost him a ton of money to make those ties. He probably sold them himself. And then he went to these stores and then they bought into his idea and then it grows from there. And then once you put the idea in motion, like this goes back to my science days. You know, in science, we have something called potential and kinetic energy. The potential is something that just sits there, right? It has potential, but it doesn't move. But as
right.
soon as you start to move it, then it gains momentum, it gains kinetic energy, it gains motion. And I think that's what people can't be afraid to do, is to put the idea in motion. Even if you start really small, if you're walking around with a small jar of like something that you want to show people, trust me, that is enough to kind of get things moving forward. And then little short-term goals will have you end up where I am at some point.
And so this kind of testing, you're sampling the fragrances that uh, did you start with one, and and when did you know that that was the right one to start to launch?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question because I was always once I started pushing the ball forward to launch the brand, then I started to surround myself around with people who were like very knowledgeable and very helpful. And that's another key, you know.
Yeah.
If you start and you create something and the people around you are not supportive, then either you need to push those people to the side or you need to cut them out completely because the best ideas are the craziest ideas in the beginning,
That's
right?
true.
So um, when I launched and I had these like incredible people around me, they said, well, if you're gonna launch a fragrance, either you're gonna do one or you're gonna do three.
Hmm.
You're not really gonna do two, you're not gonna do four because one is like this is your fragrance, three tells a story. So I
Uh-huh.
wanted to launch three in the beginning. So that was Renaissance, Dance Sauvage, and Harlem Nights.
So that's the
Um,
trilogy.
that's the trilogy. That's the Renaissance collection.
Okay.
And in the beginning, when I was creating with my perfumers and friends, I wanted to make something so perfect that I could not stop doing modifications. We started at point A and we did so many modifications. Okay, well, I wanted to be perfect. I want everyone to like it. I'm like stressing out about it. So if I made a fragrance for Harriet and Harriet loved it, and then I showed it to my friend Jamal and he hated it, then I would change it so you both would love it. So what
Uh,
happened was Harriet would hate it and then Jamal would love it. So what I did was I said, you know what? I need to create something that I love, that
hmm,
I am so in love with because I need to support it. I need to back it up. I need to tell the story. And I can't make other people happy. That was never the goal. The goal was to make something I love. But hopefully you would, you know, come along the journey with me, understand the story, and love the fragrance too, because I was never going to be able to make anyone happy. So that in the beginning taught me a lot about creation, because I would kept changing it over and over to try to make everyone happy, and that's never going to happen in life, in perfume, anything that you do, but you don't
so
have to
true.
make everyone happy. It's for the people who understand you and your story and who want to follow you.
That I give an amen to that one, Chris. Let me remind folks you are listening to Dreamleapers with Harriet Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. I want to tell you that this is Fashion Week. We're talking to Chris Collins, who has a line of fragrances, unisex fragrances, by the way, which I love when it could just be, does it speak to you? And when it does, then you can wear it.
Mm.
Want to also remind folks, you know, WBAI has been around for 62 years, which is just amazing to think of. Through the pandemic, through all kinds of other things that have knocked other businesses out. This means of communication, 24/7 radio, where we get to bring you wonderful stories, is a survivor. And it's all because of you, the folks who are listening right now. We accept no advertising, which is pretty amazing when you think of it. And Chris and I are talking about the world of image and beauty, and that thrives based on advertising. WBAI doesn't take any. What we are is listener sponsored, which means everyone who is listening, we invite you to make a contribution, to make a donation, to ensure that this programming will continue in perpetuity. And how you do that is you call 212-209-2950 and just make a contribution. You can make a one-time contribution. You can make a pledge to become what we call a BAI buddy, which is when you give a monthly donation. And people go, why would I do that? Well, you know how every month you have to pay the light bill and the phone bill and all those other bills? Well, WBAI does too. And so if you'd like to make a monthly contribution, you can become a BAI buddy or make a one-time donation. Again, the number is 212-209-2950. You can also go online at give to the numeral 2 WBAI.org. And I know many of you have already contributed, and we thank you for that and want you to know that this is an ongoing relationship. So one contribution is good, but we need one today. So call us 212-209-2950 and help us to spread the love and keep bringing on wonderful guests like Chris Collins, who I'm inspired already. And I actually am wearing one of the fragrances because I got one yesterday, Chris. And I like what traditionally would be called men's fragrances, woody, earthy kind of fragrances. And Harlem Nights is the one that I think you gave us, right?
Right.
Can you describe what that smells like?
So in fragrance, I think a lot of people are really hell bent on like categories, not just fragrance, but almost in everything. Like men's,
Sure.
women's, like this belongs to me, this belongs to you.
Right.
But the way I create fragrance is more so masculine, feminine, right? So of course I create the fragrances. So most of my fragrances lean more masculine, but they're all unisex. Even if they are masculine, which the only definition which separates masculine and feminine fragrances are the floral notes. So
Right.
in fragrances history, it has been kind of explained that if your fragrance is like super floral, it's more feminine. So I use a lot of ambery notes. I use a lot of woody notes. I love boozy notes. So the one that you're wearing, Harlem Nights, um, was the first fragrance I ever created, and I wanted to embody the feeling of what a 1920s speakeasy would have smelled like. Of course, I would never know. But what do I think it would smell like? I think it would be woody. I think there's like the wood from the bar, wood from the floors. I think
Right.
it would be boozy because obviously during a prohibition, there was alcohol everywhere. So
Everywhere.
there's a rum note in there that which gives it that little bit of sweetness. There's a patchouli note that gives it a little bit of floral. So I wanted to create a scent that embodied that 1920 speakeasy and kind of bring it forward to now. So there, after that, Harlem Nights was created.
So your science background, because you described that you were thinking about being a doctor,
Yep,
did that help you when it comes to
tremendously,
developing fragrance?
tremendously.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who knew, right? Like who knew that my biochemistry and my chemistry classes would help me in perfume because fragrance is very molecule based. You have synthetic, you have natural molecules, which some notes like the rum note that you're wearing in Harlem Nights, it'll be illegal for me to put actual rum in it. So we have to create an accord. An accord is something that gives you a scent, a smell, but you have to use other molecules to combine it to give you that scent. So my science background helped me tremendously. Perfumers, so the perfumers, the chemists that put it together, are actually chemistry. They're the chemists, the chemistry majors. So my science background helped me tremendously in communication of what I wanted, how I wanted it, and how to explain the story in the process of creation, which a lot of people nowadays are very interested in. Like, when I first started wearing fragrances, people were just really concerned with, you smell good or you don't. But now the consumer is really smart. They know about the top notes. They know about the heart notes and the base notes and the CRs, which is the distance between me and you and how far you can smell the fragrance. The
Ah,
consumer is very, very smart. So I was able to take my science background and use that to explain it on a level as a chemist and as a brand founder.
that had to be fun for the people that you were working with, because I know a lot of times people have ideas for fragrance, but they don't
Right.
have the language, they don't have the science
No.
behind it. So they're really at the whim of whoever they're working with. But you were able to partner, right?
Right. Right.
With
And again, I'm sure that, you know, once you dedicate yourself, will probably have been something I could have learned, but it
Mhm.
helped that I already had that background. And again, remember, I don't believe in coincidence. So I used what education I had, which once I decided I wasn't going to be a doctor, I'm like, what am I going to do with all this science? And actually, I majored in two subjects. I majored in biology and psychology. And you can't tell me that the psychology part is so important to fragrance
Yes.
based on emotion and mood. Uh, it all kind of helped me. I remember talking to my mom one day. My mom, she's so sweet. She's just like, even during my modeling days, she would kind of slip in without saying like, like trying to be offensive. Like, Chris, are you gonna go back to medical school? Like, she was really sweet because she really wanted me to go back to school. And I
Oh,
said, Mom, I don't think I'm gonna go school, go become a doctor anymore. I think my life, I've seen the world. There's more things that I want to do than be a doctor. And then when I launched my brand, she said, well, Chris, why don't you talk about your science background when you talk about fragrance? And I said, well, because it doesn't really. And then I said, wait a minute. You're absolutely
yeah.
right. So mom always knows. She's like, talk about it.
Yep.
Talk about your science background, and you know, decided to
Well,
do
and,
it.
and then that psychology piece, like going back to Ralph Lauren, his is all about psychology, right? I
Right.
mean, the psychology of lifestyle and creating a world, like you said, many people don't realize, but Ralph Lauren's really, his real name is Ralph Lipschitz.
Lipschitz.
And like many Jewish Americans, which is a similar story to Black Americans, uh, there was a need to create another identity because they were so persecuted. Some years ago, people changed their names a lot. He went beyond changing his name to create a world that people would be that was exclusive but also welcoming,
Right.
and that's all psychology. So,
Well, I mean, you hit it right on the head. And let me tell you something. Um, when when I created a brand, Ralph created a brand. When we all create these brands, essentially what we're creating is this world of fantasy.
yep,
Um, and it's this world. It's tangible, but it may not be the life that you live daily, right?
right.
Not to say there's anything wrong with the life you live and the fantasy that I'm creating, but maybe you want to detach for a little bit. And maybe while wearing one of my fragrances, you do. Maybe you feel, more opulent. Maybe you feel more sexy. Maybe, I tell people when I tell the story of the fragrance, like I don't make fragrance, I make romance. I make love. I make you know, those emotions that people want to feel, that fantasy, that world that they want to go into. So that's why I predicate my brand on storytelling, because the story will lure you into that fantasy world, and then you can take it, run with it, and do with it as you may. And Ralph was genius in doing that, and that's
Indeed.
what I learned from him. He created a world that it probably existed. And here's another point that I wanted to make. Usually the things that we do, we don't, recreate the will, right? The will is already there.
Sure.
But what can you do with that will? I mean, you could take that will and you can make it yours and mold it and turn it into something that is different from what people actually know. He did not create fashion, but what he did in fashion was so innovative.
Yes.
Now, people since then have, you know, taken that and run with it and done other things, but fragrance is centuries old. But I took it and as a black founder, gave it another perspective, gave it another story. So take that and don't be afraid to learn the history of what you're interested in and then take it and make it yours.
That's right. You mentioned something that makes me laugh. I don't know the word. You said a word about the distance that a fragrance
Yeah.
travels between. What's that called?
The sillage.
The sillage.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think of the sillage with, well, let's go with one of those fragrances that young men love, Axe, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
woo! I smell you before you walk into the room, right?
Exactly.
Or when people are nervous or they, there's something special happening and they just spray on too much fragrance. You're like, oh,
Hmm.
I smelled you before I saw you.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, that's not what you want to have happen. You want
No.
the sillage to be something that's more entrancing and welcoming. And uh,
Right.
how do you figure that out? That's obviously a scientific kind of
Hmm.
thing. But how do you figure out how far a fragrance will travel?
Well, it depends on the note combination.
Mhm.
So when you use a high level of ingredients, usually the fragrance will stay closer to you because when people buy fragrance, I think you should want to be able to enjoy it for yourself before you want other people to smell it. Because I think you got to live with it, walking around all day long. It's gonna evolve, it's gonna change in cooler
Right.
months and warmer months. You have to love the fragrances. The fragrances that are loud and you could smell like across the room are usually the fragrances that don't have high level of ingredients.
Oh,
So because the level of ingredients aren't, that high, the high end, it's loud. The more fragrance, the notes that you use that when you source them from incredible ingredients from like all over the world, like India, Africa, France, um, it stays closer to you, and the sillage is more like a whiff of
mhm,
something that kind of draws you in. It's not something that is like
right.
up your nose. So the higher quality fragrance you buy, the more the sillage will be normal, and then you can enjoy it for hours on end.
Got it. That's fascinating. I mean, again, I think of, see, you loved science and that's why you majored in it. But like for kids out there who are in school or thinking about what they have to study, a lot of times, Chris, like, oh, do I have to take math? Do
No.
I have to take science?
Oh,
And then no, kids, if you aren't into that, whatever you're not into, you're like, why do
right.
I have to do that? Am I ever going to use it? And what
Hmm.
I've learned over time is, especially those things that are challenging for you, you end up using them.
That's
These
true.
these subjects, these core subjects, in odd ways, they show up in your life. Now, in your case, you chose science, and look at what you are doing with it now. That's pretty great.
Right. No, you're right. And then you never know the things that your parents made you do. They end up being so beneficial. I remember when I was in high school, my dad made me take a typing class. I'm like, why the hell do I need
Yeah,
to take a typing class? I mean, could you imagine now, like being not being
right?
able to type and sending all your emails and everything? So, yeah, I think everything that you do, even those things that you don't want to do, end up being, tools for you to be successful later on in life.
Absolutely. I always say become expert at anything you don't want to do,
That's
because
right.
then you got that tool in your toolkit, and you're good. You
That's
you
right.
you you don't let it conquer you. It's not even conquer it, but you just become expert at it, and then you've got it, and it doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't grasp you in the wrong
And
way.
and don't be afraid to keep learning too, because
Mm,
like there may be a young, person that wants to become a perfumer or wants to create a brand. You don't have to have studied science. It helped me, but you can learn along the way
that's right.
things that will help you, be successful and create like an incredible brand. So there's never stop learning. The minute you decide that you want to stop learning, is everything kind of stops for you at that point.
Exactly. It's so true. Never stop learning. Did you hear that, WBAI? Let me remind you, you're listening to Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole here on our favorite radio station, WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City. And you can listen absolutely anywhere by going online to WBAI.org. Again, I came to WBAI because my husband used to always listen to it in the car, like literally turning on the radio in the car. And there's so many smart talk shows on WBAI, as well as great music, great content. And, during challenging years, I've been on this radio station for 4 years now, when there was a lot of what was called fake news, real news was here. People tell the truth. And also, what I particularly think is important is bringing people on who can inspire us. I learned from my earliest days that when you surround yourself with people who will inspire you, who can and choose to inspire you and each other, then your life is just that much sweeter. And so that's what Dream Leapers is all about. And I thank everyone who is listening, and I invite you to support our beloved radio station by making a contribution today. You can call us at 212-209-2950. And whatever it is, there's no contribution that is too small. And by the way, no contribution that is too big. You can make whatever you want. 212-209-2950. And you can also go online at give to the numeral 2 WBAI.org and make your contribution today. We appreciate you, and hope that you will appreciate us by making a contribution. So we're talking to Chris Collins. He's made a line of fragrances. The first door that he went into was Bergdorf Goodman. For those of you who may not have been there yet, just take a walk, a stroll through Bergdorf's. It is a beautiful store. Talk about dreams. You walk into the store and it's just opulent. It smells good. It looks good. And it transports you into, who knows, wherever you think you want to be at that moment. You walk through and you might be moving from room to room and really just have an experience of being transported somewhere else, which is kind of fun. I love that. Chris, you started at Bergdorf's. Well, you're in many doors now. So how did
Mhm.
that evolve?
Well, it's funny when you were telling the story about Bergdorf. Remember, I had never been into Bergdorf until I
Right?
went in to look for that fragrance. So when I think about it now, going in to see my own fragrance on the counter is, mind blowing. I think um, in the beginning, especially being a black perfumer, there weren't a whole lot of people who were ready to, take the leap of faith and to bring me in because
Sure.
it was something that was different, which, I understood. I wasn't happy about it, but I understood. So I knew I needed to make Bergdorf Goodman successful, and I needed to keep telling my story. And the way that I got into Bergdorf is that I walked into the store one day and I said, "Can someone introduce me to the buyer?" And they all looked at me like I was crazy. They, of course, you got to be a little crazy, right, in order to,
That's it.
uh, make your dreams kind of manifest. And one woman, she ended up riding the train home with the buyer that night and said, "This guy came in today. I think you should actually, listen to his story." And I brought my fragrances in because I would go everywhere with them and spray them on anyone who would like, want to try them. And um, he ended up giving me a chance. And the one thing that I kind of begged for in the beginning was this opportunity because I knew I had something
Yep.
good, something unique. And then once one catches on, then the others start to, hear about you, and then the streets start talking, and then everyone is kind of like, "Well, we love your brand. We would love to bring you in." But that's the way it goes. It happens no different for me than it probably happened with Ralph. You know,
Mhm.
and now I have some incredible retail partners. I'm at Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, which is a parent company of Bergdorf Goodman. We're at Sephora and Saks Fifth Avenue, which we just recently launched. I went in the store yesterday and met all the salespeople, which is one of the things that I love doing. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey. Um, but the work doesn't stop there.
Sure.
You know, the difficult part is to become partners with the retailers. And then the more difficult part is to stay there and be successful. So you got to build the brand. So it's a lot of work, a lot of hours, a lot of dedication, which when you're passionate about, you don't mind putting those things in when you're passionate about something.
What year did you launch?
2018. I launched in March, in March 2018.
So you at least had a little runway before the pandemic. But
Yes. Yeah.
but then the pandemic came, and there's so many
Right.
businesses that did not survive. Uh,
Hmm.
you did. What did I always ask people, what did you do during those
Hmm.
2 years when we were quarantined? People weren't going out. I mean, I still put on my fragrance every day because I do it for me, you
That's
know.
right.
And but what happened to the fragrance industry and to
Hmm.
you during the pandemic?
Well, just like for everyone, it was a very scary, kind of
Mhm.
uncertain time for me. Um, I think what actually helped me or was in my benefit is that I wasn't so large that I didn't really depend on the retailers as much,
Mm.
meaning I didn't have like standalone stores where I had employees and
Right.
things like that. Because I was small, I was still partnering with like the Bergdorfs and some boutiques. It wasn't until after the pandemic that I started partnering with like Nordstrom and Saks
Oh,
Fifth
so
Avenue,
that's recent. These are
Sephora.
those are recent.
Yeah, it's pretty recent. Um, but what it did was, you take a really, you know, unfortunate situation and you kind of try to turn it into your benefit. What it did was it taught me not to depend on the retailers, but to focus
Mm.
on my storytelling with the people who are following me and my direct consumer business. So
Right.
that made me focus really hard on that part. Um, so it was a gift and a curse. Let's
Mm.
say, everything's shutting down. And then I was able to kind of, focus on that. I redid my website. I wanted to tell my story more. I wanted to like, concentrate on my social media. So I was able to survive and fight through it. I know many brands that weren't. I know
Mm.
many brands that launched during the pandemic that are doing actually really well. Um, and you're right, fragrance is very personal. And I would get messages from people. One woman in particular, she emailed me and she said, Chris, thank you. Your fragrances. I mean, I'm home alone and I wear your fragrances, and your fragrance helped me fall back in love with myself because I was feeling really low. And I knew, okay,
Right.
this is the point. This is the
That
point.
that is the point. So you have launched new fragrances as part of your collection now. Tell us,
Yeah.
we just have a few minutes left. Tell us what's in the collection and what do we have to look forward to?
Different, kind of. So I usually launch in collections, so it's just another kind of collection to tell a different story. Like I have a dark romance collection, I have a Renaissance collection. Um, Always, I got thousands of stories to tell. Who knows if I'll get a chance to tell all of them? But I'm telling them as I can. Every year I launch about two fragrances, one in the beginning of spring and one during the holiday.
Nice.
I launched three this year, which was the Anima collection, which is the collection that I launched exclusive at Sephora. So just more stories and great fragrance. I'm always working on something new. I'm working on stuff 2, 3 years ahead already. So
And because often with fragrance there are candles involved, can we look forward to that?
yeah, I'm definitely gonna do some line extensions. Home fragrance did really well, obviously during the
Yes.
pandemic. And I think that's normally the next step because it's all fragrance, like home fragrance, fine fragrance for body. So definitely working on something special for a candle.
Well, as one who loves fragrance, including candles,
Right.
I look forward to that too. Thank you so much, Chris, and congratulations. This is exciting. Folks, you can find Chris Collins. Your website, tell us what that is too.
ChrisCollins.com. And the social media handle is at World of Chris Collins.
At World of Chris Collins, chriscollins.com. His fragrances are available in lots of places. Again, take that stroll through Bergdorf's. You can go to Sephora. You can go to many other stores, but have the experience.
Yeah.
They're yummy, and I'm enjoying them. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Chris. Wonderful to talk to you, and good luck with everything that's next.
Thank you, Harry. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, WBAI family. Go check out Chris Collins Fragrances. Enjoy your day, enjoy your week. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.